Hello and welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast. I'm your host, Meghan McCarthy, clinical social worker. We're grateful for the opportunity to share this space with you today as we talk about the complexities of giftedness. Today we welcome Abby Spiwak and Kari Zweber Palmer to explore the social learning curriculum that targets essential SEL needs of our gifted population. Abby has been teaching for 6 years. She's currently teaching third group and is implementing the social thinking curriculum SuperFlex.
I think allowing them to know that I am an adult and I make mistakes, and that's okay. That's the environment that I think is so important to be able to develop these skills like flexible thinking, like perspective taking. That's the foundation of our house. And then once we have that, we can build those other things.
Kari Zweber Palmer is a social cognitive therapist at Social Thinking Stevens Creek. She's an author of several award-winning social-emotional learning curriculums, including the We Thinker series, and You Are a Social Detective.
Social thinking is a methodology that really provides evidence-based strategies for individuals aged 4 all the way up to adulthood. What is the kind of commonality is that we're trying to help support developing social competencies, flexible thinking, social problem solving to help our students meet their own social goals.
Kari is a member of the Social Thinking Speakers Collaborative and travels internationally giving workshops. Kari began her career as a school-based speech-language pathologist and currently consults with school districts on implementing social thinking into their programming. We broke up this interview into 2 parts. In part 1, we walked through a few SEL standards, such as social observation, social awareness, perspective taking, flexible thinking, and self-regulation. And we discussed how these have an impact in the classroom performance of a gifted learner. Many of these SEL standards that we talked through are also CASEL standards. By the end of this episode, you will have strategies to promote flexible thinking and how to use social observation to strengthen social awareness in our gifted learners. Welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast, Abby and Kari.
Hi, thank you.
Hello, thank you for having us.
So when we reflect on the SEL needs that often present themselves in the gifted profile, we often see that our students struggle with things like social observation, social awareness, perspective taking, flexible thinking, and self-regulation. So before we dive into the curriculum, I'd love to process these skills with both of you and just kind of discuss how we see them play out in our various settings. So let's start with you, Abby. How have you observed your gifted students in your classroom struggle with perspective taking?
Yeah, I think first, gifted students are incredible, and perspective taking can be challenging for all students, but specifically students who are gifted. I tend to see that in 2 to 3 areas. The first one is tendency towards black and white thinking, so really rigid terms, seeking really logical solutions. The positive of that is that our students are approaching these problems in unique ways, but I tend to see it where students have a difficulty to choose a side or stuck on a rule and maybe don't see the gray area in the rule. That I think is something as their teacher, I really try and focus and work on those skills with them to develop understanding that not everything is black and white. There are some gray areas in life. I also see that with perfectionism. I know you guys have talked a lot about that on the Gifted Ed podcast, but that's something I see a lot in my students with their advanced cognitive abilities. Sometimes they really have high standards for themselves and others.
Yeah.
And so, if it doesn't align with their own expectations, it can be really challenging. This can be like whether it's not being called on in a discussion, difficulty to see why someone else was maybe called on, or when it comes to some difficult, challenging math problems, that struggle is new for some students. And so that can be challenging as well. Lastly, I see it when students can be very fixated on their own ideas. They have such high levels of curiosity, but it can be difficult when students want their idea or their group project idea or group project creation to be the center of that. And so that compromise is something they have to learn and a skill they have to develop too. So I really see it in those big 3 areas for sure in my classroom.
When I'm thinking too that you have third grade and I know you did second before, I feel like in kindergarten and pre-K and then somewhat into first, it can kind of switch maybe towards the end of first. Friends don't do things that are bad or good. in second and third, right? There starts being more gray. I mean, there's always gray, but I feel like in the mind of a 4 or 5, 6-year-old, it's a good friend or a bad friend. It's a right or a wrong. There's a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something. And then I feel like second grade, the mind kind of starts like short circuiting sometimes in social scenarios, because there could be 5 opposite ways of doing them and they're all right. And I feel like that alone, that rigidity piece that you talked about in the beginning, really, I feel like hits the grades that you're in.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think too, where students are very much rule followers, they see that rule, when in life, like every rule doesn't fit into that box. There's that gray area. And how do you navigate, like, ooh, that rule didn't
So
quite fit in that box. Yeah, it is uncomfortable. And so I think that's just something I really try and help students develop by giving them opportunities to collaborate and connect with each other. And hey, this there is a middle ground to this. There's not a right or a wrong. There's multiple pathways to get to that solution. And that's, again, just something that you have to incorporate so students can develop and learn in different situations and different scenarios too.
Yeah.
Kari, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Something I've noticed too is that social awareness piece. And I think that plays out when students struggle with perspective taking, right? That can have an effect on their social awareness and their peer connection. So I'd love to hear about how tricky social awareness and social observation can be for your students and clients that you work with, and how it impacts their relationships too.
Yeah, well, that's such a great place to start, because everything in the social world starts with observation for all of us. So even if I'm at the grocery store staring at my phone, I could miss a friend walk by, and missing that information then, has an impact of our relationships and how we move across that social world. We know that our social attention has roots in our neurology. So therefore, we're going to see a wide range of social learning systems. For some of my students, their social attention is more intuitive. When they enter in a room, they are highly aware of what's happening and the people and what those people might be thinking about them. And that ultra focus of that social attention creates a lot of social anxiety. Whereas I have other students that might benefit from more support in terms of their social attention. Just a couple quick examples to try to bring that to life. I was working with a group of 4th grade students that had the gifted learning profile, and we were playing the game 2 Truths and a Trick, where you write down 2 facts about yourself and 1 lie. And then the group mates try to guess which one is the lie. And I had one of my students write down, I love to knit, I have 2 cats, and there is a blue clock in my room. And immediately a group mate jumped in and said, well, the lie has to be that you love to knit. And the kid kind of looked at him and he goes, well, who likes to knit? And so besides the fact that we had to kind of problem solve, the other thing important to know about this is the student that had written that down was literally wearing a shirt that says, I love to knit. So in that context, the students just missed taking in with that social attention, what's going on, what are the clues? And that information, as you could see, could have a really important impact on how you might navigate that whole entire social situation. Another quick little story too to illustrate that social attention piece is I was working with 7th graders, and one of my 7th graders was talking about how he really had this social goal of connection with a peer. They had met in class, and he told me this other peer made his nerd brain tingle because they had a lot of shared academic interests. And his hope was really to build connection. But what we started to kind of talk through over time is that his strategy to build connection was the use of humor. And as we know, humor is so nuanced, and that gray area, like we were talking about before. And in middle school, students often use kind of sarcastic humor or burning each other or ways they kind of poke fun, but to build connection. And it became apparent over time that the student was not really paying attention to some of those more subtle nonverbal cues. So the feedback wasn't coming in with the eye rolls or the moving a little bit farther away or responding. So really needed to kind of talk about social attention and how we might pick up on those cues in order to continue to try to reach or meet those social goals.
Yeah, I love that you talked about the cues, right? Like that's something I see with students and I
Yeah.
see the need to develop and learn that, right? Even something as simple as we're in math class and everyone has whiteboards. Being able to look around the room and pick up on a cue of, okay, this is the next subject, this is the material I need to get out. And some students need to develop that skill, whether it's socially, whether it's executive functioning wise in the classroom too. I definitely see that with my students too.
And I also wonder, because I think prior, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like when I was first learning about this years and years ago, I kind of just always assumed that the students who aren't exhibiting the skills need to be taught them discreetly, right? And I think that is true for some. I think a piece that I've been exploring more with students who have the gifted profile and the sensitivities, I feel like sometimes they take in everything.
Yes.
They
Mhm.
truly look at every cue, every facial, all the things. And it's almost like they need help prioritizing what do I listen to. And that might be
Yeah.
true of non-gifted too, but I feel like that's a piece that I didn't quite get until I experienced it with
Mhm.
students where I was like, oh, you are getting it all. We
Yeah.
just need to know what, and that might be true again elsewhere, but it's like, no, I didn't see the shirt. What are you talking about? Where this is like, no, I knew the shirt, I knew the color, I knew my grandma used to have a blanket, like all the pieces to it. So
Yes.
that's I feel like a piece that I'm exploring within the gifted realm that I didn't so much was exposed to prior to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Abby, I know that SEL is embedded in everything that you do in your classroom, but how do you support students to be flexible thinkers throughout the various subject areas?
Yeah, I mean, flexible thinking is so important for kids, and I think it's so important for teachers too. I think I have really developed flexible thinking in modeling that in my classroom. And one of the big ways, and just looking at your examples, Carrie, that you mentioned, is not necessarily looking at a behavior as bad or good, but really looking
Yeah.
at it as communication. These students are communicating something to me, and I need to be flexible in how I'm responding to that communication. And I think that first is a perfect way to start with modeling that flexible thinking. But I also really do that in my classroom by giving them opportunities to think flexibly. So allowing students to change their mind when presented with new ideas. Using phrases like, let's think outside the box, guys. Let's look at the big picture here. Let's play devil's advocate. Teaching them those phrases to think flexibly is huge. I also really try and get my students to connect to their peers in that discussion. So, for example, I may have students break apart and discuss a science topic, whether it, for example, we're talking about the likelihood of survival based on certain traits an animal has. And so students are collaborating, they're discussing, they're so excited to share. And so one way I really encourage them to think flexibly is sharing somebody else's idea in your group. And so then they're not fixated on their own ideas. They're wanting to participate, they're wanting to share, but they're also connecting with their peers by sharing someone else's idea and spotlighting somebody else. So we use the phrases, oh, this student shared this. And so they're highlighting a friend while they're also still being able to share their feedback and their ideas. And I've seen that really help with that flexible thinking in the classroom. I also really focus on challenging that perfectionism piece. So things like they cannot say the E word in my classroom. Easy. They cannot say that word. They know it's a bad word. And so we talk about why is that not a word we're going to say? Because our friends may not think that that task was easy that I think is easy. So they know that they can't say the E word. We also have math rules or math norms, I call them. And those are focused on that everyone can learn math. Mistakes are important. Questions are important. Really focusing on depth is more important than speed. And my students know these rules in our math class, and that encourages them to think flexibly about what they're doing and allow them to take safe risks too.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just allowing them to think curiously about things. We do a wonder wall project where students can research something that they're curious about, something that they wonder about. And it gets them to think flexibly because they're having to research something that they have no idea about and be able to teach it to their friends and their classmates. So it's really embedded in a lot of what I do. But I think the key is me as the teacher modeling that too for students, so then they feel safe to think flexibly and try new things too.
I think the two things that came to mind, one was having to laugh, as we all know, the post-recess discussion that happens way too often, or not often enough. I mean, it's an essential, it should just be another subject in our day, in our curriculum. Is how many conversations, once I realized you can change the word from liar to they changed their mind, was like life-changing, right? Because it was like, nope, they're a liar. And it's like, well, no, they just decided not to like basketball today and they wanted to play soccer, So I feel like, but then again, that black and white, good or bad, that thinking, labeling someone as a liar versus, oh no, they just changed their mind. And then you put it in that context, they're like, oh, okay. It kind of gave a little lightness to it versus someone, doing this to me.
And that sparked something. I use the phrase rewind. Wait, let's rewind. Or let's change the channel in our mind, right? Those phrases are connected to TV, are connected to things that kids know. And I think, we're going to go into the social thinking curriculum, but I think the benefit of that is that it takes the bad out of the behavior, and those type of phrases take it out of the behavior too. Let's rewind, let's try that again, or let's change the channel. Right now we're angry, let's change the channel to a different channel, right? That can take the good and bad out of the behavior and just focus on, wait, we're communicating right now, how are we going to move past this?
And I think just one other piece, I can't let it go. Maybe I'm not being very flexible, but before we go into the curriculum, is just how important it is. You acknowledge safety a few times, is that we often say, take a risk, take a risk, I mean, there's posters all over schools about, risk taking, but to expect that without a safety net, without a culture that this is okay to do, is it's just so important to have that safety piece, to have the classroom environment set up to where mistakes are okay, they're embraced, they're celebrated. There's like a whole piece, I feel like, that really should be intentional when we're looking at taking risks, because I think that's just such an important part.
Oh yeah, and there are times I'm teaching a math lesson and I get it wrong. Oh, I made a mistake, guys. Like, thanks for catching that. And I think allowing them to know that, like, I am an adult and I make mistakes, and that's okay. Like, that's the environment that I think is so important to be able to develop these skills, like flexible thinking, like perspective taking. That's the root of it. That's the foundation of our house. And then once we have that, we can build those other things.
And I can just add too, in that topic of taking safe risks, so important to be able to give our students opportunities to identify what feels safe for them, because we individually have our own system. So one strategy we use in social thinking is literally just to make a scale. I do a lot of scaled kind of work to show sometimes the nuance of the social world. So it's just a vertical line up and down, high risk, medium risk, low risk. And then we plot different maybe classroom activities or social interactions or things like that on that risk scale, in order to get our students' perspective to then understand what feels safe to them might be very different for someone else. As a teacher, Abby, as you're creating that environment, as those things come together, it does lead to an environment where we can do our best learning.
Well, I love that idea, and I just jotted that down. I'm definitely going to do that with my students, because I think I know what their risk level is, but for them to know that, how powerful to like enable them to, hey guys, let's take a medium risk today, or are we up for this high level risk? Let's try it. What can I do to help you with that high risk, to make that risk more comfortable for you? That's an incredible idea. I can't wait to try that with my students.
It's also fascinating when you think
Yes.
You're right, and then you write it down, and in your head you're like, oh, so that's a big risk. Okay, well, that explains a lot of the behavior that we're trying to process. If that's a big risk.
Yes.
And my view could be so wrong too, right? And I'd love to hear from them what they're comfortable with.
Okay, the curriculum. So,
That's right.
Kari, can you kind of give us a general overview of social thinking and SuperFlex curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. So, social thinking is a methodology that really provides evidence based strategies for individuals aged 4 all the way up to adulthood. So, there is a lot to unpack. What is the kind of commonality within the methodology, really, is that we're trying to help support developing social competencies, flexible thinking, social problem solving to help our students meet their own social goals. And just to really emphasize that point really briefly, that's such an important piece. As the adult, it is not my job to tell students what their social goals are. I need to get curious, get their perspective, just like what we were talking about with the risk scale, to figure out then where could supports be added in. So we really want to focus on that. Social thinking is a metacognitive approach. So we talk about thinking and we think about thinking, and therefore you'll find a lot of our strategies, frameworks, and materials support that idea. Specifically, when we start talking about SuperFlex, it is one of many. So there's a lot of materials out there that have been developed alongside of our students and gotten feedback from our community and teachers and a whole host of people kind of looking at it and helping us to create. SuperFlex is a 2-part curriculum. It starts with our social detective series that is really designed to help students first learn how to observe what's going on around them, read social situations, and interpret clues. So kind of like what we talked about at the top of the podcast with social attention, that social detective curriculum is designed to teach that in a concrete way. Then we have an opportunity after we kind of laid that foundation to go into the SuperFlex curriculum. And that's where we're going to learn more about flexible thinking and self-regulation. The basic premise of SuperFlex is, the social world is really complicated. And we use this curriculum to help make thinking and learning about it a little bit more fun and a little bit more so we can put space in between what's happening and how the student is feeling and the social world around them. So we create this imaginary superhero world. We are pretending with our students to be a superhero, that we're all surrounded by these pesky villains that we call unthinkabots. And unthinkabots, as you will see if you ever look at the materials, they're just little cartoon characters. They're illustrated little characters that are trying to take over the power of our flexible thinking. So, for example, the leader of the unthinkabots is Rock Brain. It's literally a rock illustrated with eyes and arms and legs. And Rock Brain, in our story, is there to deploy stuck bots to get us really stuck on doing things one way, to focus only on our own ideas, or forgetting to have us ask for help. So the idea behind SuperFlex is that we can identify these moments or situations where we get challenged by these bots and how we can learn strategies to support managing them and what's happening.
And as you're thinking through I guess, part of the conversation we had in the beginning, but then also the intention of the curriculum and the intention of the programming, are there certain diagnoses or profiles or needs that really align well with the intentions of the program?
Right. So at Social Thinking, we like to say it's never the label, it's the learning. So we're really trying to be curious about who's in front of us and what's a fit, what's a match. When it comes to SuperFlex especially, it's a very abstract curriculum. So you probably just heard, even in that example, like thinkabots and we're managing powers, and it's all this metacognitive journey that we're on together. So it's not a fit for everyone. If students are really struggling to determine if the characters are real or fictional, not a great use. There are other things to use. In general, if it's leading to more dysregulation, or it's simply if students don't like it, it's okay. It's not a good fit. And there are other things we can try.
Yeah, well, and I think too, just as someone who has started to implement it, is learning about it. I did the social detective previously with my students last year, and then this year they're getting SuperFlex. And I think just the high level of engagement is amazing. I mean, the behavior is not bad or good. The behavior is these characters that are communicating something, and these students are learning strategies to overcome these characters, or villains, as we call them, and learning these proactive, purposeful strategies to help them. I love Worry Wall. Worry Wall is a big one we use in my classroom. And those worry bots are being deployed, and we're using strategies to help us in those situations when we are worrying. Last year, I even used a little bit of Destroyer of Fun. Destroyer of Fun tends to cheat in games, tends to not play fairly. And we talk about the impact of Destroyer of Fun. It's not these behaviors or the student being labeled as bad. It is truly learning these strategies to help us overcome this and learn from it, which I think is so powerful for kids. And it does it in such an incredibly fun way. I've never seen such high engagement in an SEL curriculum before. And so I loved implementing it. My kids are so excited about it. So yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. I mean, really, anytime you've got a good match between the learner and the content, and just as you said, that's the intention of SuperFlex. It's such an important point to just keep bringing out. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to take the pressure off. It's supposed to give us language to be able to talk about those situations that can be complicated or uncomfortable, and make it be about what are our strategies we have at hand, but also understand we are all trying to figure this out. It's not just the students, it's us as adults too that are encountering a lot of this and need strategies to help support and advocate for our needs.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned before about knowing that it's fake and knowing that it's pretend was like kind of how I started. Listen, guys, this is not real. There are not stuck bots entering our brain. There are not worry bots entering our brain, but I'm ready to have some fun with this. Are you? And just having that open discussion about it and the purpose behind it and why we're using it with my students, I found to be really helpful. And again, they're engaged. They're wanting more. They're loving the characters. They're excited about the characters. And that's just been really cool to see.
This concludes part 1 of our discussion with Abby Spiwak and Kari Zweber Palmer. In the next episode, we'll dive deeper into these SEL standards by discussing how the SuperFlex curriculum addresses the SEL needs of our gifted learners. We want to thank you for joining us in this space today. Please subscribe to the Gifted Ed podcast to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode that continues to unpack the complexities of giftedness.